in the skies of Tehran. Do you accept that as a result of the war that you're backing, we may see Iranian refugees on British shores, and would you back the government taking them? Well, you let our armed forces sort of run down over the years, so you're not patriotic.
Well, I don't agree with that. We've got two aircraft. We're the only European power, major European power, to have two.
And we had no planes on them for years.
And with the UK as spectators, we don't.
Well, maybe that's good. Maybe we should be spectators. Maybe we shouldn't be getting involved at something that could be illegal, that could create massive refugee flows. It is already causing people who are listening to this, probably going to cost them money in terms of their energy bills. Who knows, maybe even gas supply shortages. Maybe we should keep out of it. We've played it in Iraq. We've played it in Afghanistan. We get rid of a regime and we cannot control the consequences. So even if you get what you wish for, which is a replacement regime, who knows what replaces it, and who knows what instability is caused, and economic damage comes, and refugees flow.
Man, this is an absolutely brutal interview. In this clip, we see the excellent British journalist Lewis Goodall really pressing the UK's Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, over his attempts to justify and defend Donald Trump's war. And honestly, Goodall just picks his arguments apart piece by piece. It's a masterclass in questioning. Credit where it's due. An excellent job by the journalist. As usual, let's watch the clip in full. I'll hold my thoughts and perspective until the end. Let's get into it.
In order for us to go in on this war, we would have to have some trust in both the Israeli government and the US government in terms of what they're saying. And if they told us last June that it had been obliterated, and we trusted them then, why would we necessarily trust them now where they appear to be telling us that perhaps it wasn't obliterated after all?
Well, again, I haven't seen the intelligence, and the situation over the course of a year can obviously change. And I think one point worth making...
You trust Trump and Netanyahu completely in terms of what they tell us
I think,
about that.
obviously, if I was in government, I'd want to see the evidence and see the intelligence.
Well, maybe they have, and maybe that's why they're not backing them.
One of the reasons why, perhaps we're not seeing that intelligence is I would imagine the Americans now view the UK as an unreliable ally. Because when the Americans wanted to use bases the UK control, things like RAF Fairford, Diego Garcia, the UK government refused permission. We didn't send any ships to the region. We still, today, haven't got any ships in the region, which is, whether or not you think we should have been involved in the offensive phase,
well, I've asked
it is a complete dereliction of duty.
What?
We have no ships in the region when the British government knew 3 or 4 weeks ago this was going to start.
But I've put that point to the Foreign Secretary this morning. But perhaps, Chris Philp, maybe they have seen that intelligence. Maybe the government have seen that intelligence, or maybe it hasn't been provided to them, and that's why they're not backing it.
Well, that is obviously complete speculation. I think the reason is that Keir Starmer is terrified of his own left wing. He's more interested in what Lord Hermer has to say than standing up to
that?
Well, he said that the reason he wouldn't participate at the beginning is that Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, gave him advice about Lord Hermer's very broad interpretation of international law.
Does legality not matter?
Legality does matter, but international law is subject to interpretation. And if you look at the Shadow Attorney General's,
and it's been interpreted, and it's illegal.
If you look at the Shadow Attorney General's view on this, Lord Wolfson, it is lawful to take action, including preemptive action, where your own security or the security of your allies may be at risk. Now, you've made the point about the nuclear programme, but there are some facts that are incontrovertible that no one disputes. For example, the Iranian regime brutally slaughtered 35,000 of its own people.
Trump didn't intervene then. Trump let that go on for weeks.
Well, hang on a second.
He had to wait. He waited until those protests had come and gone before he intervened. And he said repeatedly, President Trump, that if the Iranians came to a deal, he would leave them in place. So it can't just be about the protesters, can it, Chris Philp?
Well, I think that is a critically important part of it. And by the way, on the timing, he had to get. Hang on a sec. He had to get the American ships in place, like the USS Gerald Ford, for example, the big aircraft carrier. Right, it took a couple of weeks to move that from wherever it was before. I think it was
Venezuela.
Venezuela or somewhere into the Middle East. Right, that took a couple of weeks. Right, so that's a legitimate logistical reason. But there are a lot of reasons why the Iranian regime, over the years and recently, is a terrible regime. The slaughter of civilians. They sponsored Hamas and encouraged Hamas in this October the 7th atrocity. The list goes on and on.
Kemi Baynot says that she and others have learned the lessons of Iraq. Everyone would agree, certainly you and I sat here, the Iranian regime, bloody, barbarous, appalling regime, no friends of ours, right? But we know we've played this game before. We've played it in Libya. We've played it in Iraq. We've played it in Afghanistan. We get rid of a regime and we cannot control the consequences. So even if you get what you wish for, which is a replacement regime, who knows what replaces it? And who knows what instability is caused? And economic damage comes, and refugees flow. You can't know the consequences. Why do we keep playing this game and expect different results?
Well, I think one of the reasons why we might have wanted to be more cooperative with the military action being taken is it would have given us an ability to understand what the plan was and perhaps even to influence it. So you're right to say that in those other examples, Iraq, Libya, Syria, even Egypt as well. Well, that was internal rather than external. But in those other examples, when the regime fell, you're right to say it doesn't necessarily follow that something better replaces it. So you do need some kind of proper plan. But on the outside,
that's how we got ISIS.
But as a result of Iraq, but the fact that we're not even really being consulted by the US means we have no influence over whatever their plan may be. We're simply.
Would we have any influence anyway?
Well, the UK is simply. We certainly have no influence now. The UK is spectators. We don't.
Well, maybe that's good. Maybe we should be spectators. Maybe we shouldn't be getting involved at something that could be illegal, that could create massive refugee flows. It is already causing people who are listening to this probably going to cost them money in terms of their energy bills. Who knows? Maybe even gas supply shortages. Maybe we should keep out of it.
Look, I think there comes a point when a rogue state's actions become so egregious, and I would say personally, slaughtering 35,000 civilians crosses that threshold where you have to take action. And you know what? You don't get certainty in these situations. Yes, you've got to think carefully. Yes, there should be a plan, and I don't know if the Americans have one or not. I'm not privy to that information. They may have a plan or they may not. I've honestly got no idea. But there comes a point when the actions of a rogue state become so bad.
So we just support the Americans no matter what?
No, I didn't say that. I think we need to be clear about why we'd be involved, stopping the civilian slaughter, stopping the nuclear program, stopping Iran-sponsored terrorism. But if we were involved, we should also be talking to the Americans about what their plan is and about how a transition could be made. But we're not even at the table.
But Keir Starmer made clear that when he was consulted about it, he was not satisfied that there was a plan. And that's why we're not involved. He's doing and done precisely what you're suggesting, which is to try and find out what the plan is. And if there isn't one, you can understand why you wouldn't back it.
No, the reason Keir Starmer, the UK, are not involved in this is because Keir Starmer is more interested in the expansive interpretation of international law that Lord Hermer gives him than about confronting the Iranian regime. He is terrified.
Maybe he's listening to the public.
He is terrified of his own left wing. He was speaking at an iftar dinner the other day, boasting that Britain wasn't involved. I don't know why he was boasting about that. And
maybe because he thinks it's a bad idea, and maybe because the British public back him on it. Look at all the polling. The British public disagree with you, and they agree with Keir Starmer. They do not want us to get involved.
Well, look, I think letting a brutal regime murder its own citizens is simply not the right thing to do, particularly where that regime is also trying to get hold of nuclear weapons, also sponsors terrorism. And by the way, look, even whatever your views are on this particular point, there is another point, which is the government have been in complete dereliction of duty by not moving British military ships into the region in advance to protect Cyprus, to protect the Gulf states. Now, because Keir Starmer was asked about this by the Americans 3 or 4 weeks ago, when they asked if they could use the Diego Garcia military base and RAF Fairford. They asked the question 3 or 4 weeks ago. So Starmer knew this was coming, and he did not move British warships like the aircraft carrier, the Prince of Wales, or the destroyer
there are lots
HMS
of countries
Dragon.
with human rights transgressions.
He didn't move those ships into the region, and he has left. Keir Starmer and Labour have left Cyprus undefended. They've left our Gulf allies like the UAE, Oman, Qatar, those sort of countries completely
well, it's your
undefended.
Party who hollowed out their armed forces.
Hang on a sec. Those ships exist. They're sitting in Portsmouth right as we speak. Sitting in Portsmouth.
If we had more ships, then maybe we would have been in a different position.
They could quite easily have moved those ships 3 weeks ago, and they failed to do so, leaving Cyprus undefended. And that is a shameful dereliction of duty.
The Conservative Party constantly bangs on about sovereignty. Here's the Prime Minister exercising sovereignty, and you're livid.
Well, he has failed to stand up to a rogue terrorist state, and he has failed to move our assets that we have. They're sitting in Portsmouth as we speak. He's failed to move our assets into position in advance. Even if you buy this Keir Starmer line about defensive operations only, you need to have the assets in theatre to provide the defence. He could have moved them 3 weeks ago, but he chose not to, leaving Cyprus and RAF Akrotiri, our base on Cyprus, completely undefended.
Your leader says Labour is nothing like the patriotic party of yesteryear. Are you really saying that Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper and David Lammy and the rest of them aren't patriotic?
Well, I would agree with that, because they have failed
They're
to
not patriotic.
They've failed to take basic action to defend things like our sovereign base in
Pretty
Cyprus.
low blow to say they're not patriotic. You might disagree with them, but are we really saying they're not patriots?
Well, they failed to take basic steps,
That's
obvious
different
common
from
sense
being
steps.
patriotic, isn't it?
Well,
you could be an incompetent patriot. We could argue we've probably had plenty of those over the years.
All right. Well, look, I'll concede this. They could either be unpatriotic or they could be incompetent, maybe even both.
But Kevin Badenoch is saying they're not patriotic, or the Labour Party is not
They are certainly one of the two.
They're saying the Labour Party is not patriotic. I mean, they could turn around to you and say, well, you let our armed forces sort of run down over the years, so you're not patriotic.
Well, I don't agree with that. We've got two aircraft. We're the only major European power to have two.
And we had no
aircraft
planes
carriers.
on them for years.
And they're fully equipped with F-35Bs, the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. But instead of being deployed in the theatre, protecting Cyprus and protecting Gulf states from the Iranian attack. And by the way, Iran is now attacking all kinds of other countries as well.
Indeed.
Instead of being deployed there, protecting the Gulf, which is obviously a critical oil route, or protecting our base on Cyprus, they're tied up in Portsmouth.
Will Kemi Badenoch apologise to the armed forces for saying that our jets are just hanging around?
Well, the criticism Kemi levelled wasn't at the aircrew or at the officers commanding
You can
the RAF.
understand they may have taken it that way.
Well, to be clear, her remarks weren't directed at the service personnel. They were directed at the Labour government, who obviously control how they're deployed. And she was commenting
they weren't
on
just hanging around, are they?
She was commenting on Labour's failure to properly deploy our armed
But she was
forces.
wrong, wasn't she? Because British F-35s and Typhoon jets have been in action, shooting down Iranian missiles in recent days. That's not just hanging around. Will she apologise?
Well, she was criticising the Labour government for the way they've deployed our armed forces.
She said they were just hanging around.
Which includes not participating in strikes into Iran to degrade not just the missiles coming over.
She criticised them incorrectly.
But to also target, what they're not doing, because the Labour government have told them not to, is target Iranian military bases.
But would you accept they're not just
Iranian
hanging around?
soil. Well, I'm afraid the way that Labour have chosen to deploy our armed forces does not include
They've been in action.
taking critical, to some extent, but they haven't been involved in taking out the source of the problem on Iranian soil.
Can you understand if you were one of those fighter pilots hearing His Majesty's loyal leader of the opposition suggest they've been hanging around while they've been in action? Could be very offensive.
I think it's clear to everybody, including service personnel, that Kemi's remarks related to decisions taken by the Labour government.
But she said they were just hanging around and they've been in action.
Yeah.
That's wrong, right? That is just factually wrong. Will she apologise for being factually wrong?
Look, as I said, the action has not included some of the things it should have done, like striking targets in Iran.
She once said that she never makes mistakes. She never has to take her words back. Would we say that that's been in evidence with that particular comment?
Look, I think she's legitimately criticised decisions taken by the Labour government.
You're backing the conflict. So by extension, the price hikes that we're almost certainly going to see at the pumps, higher energy prices, higher mortgage rates, that's a price worth paying for people.
Well, I think ultimately you end up, when you have a rogue state like Iran, which is sponsoring terrorism, you end up one way or another paying higher prices at one point or another anyway, right? There's a cost to doing nothing as well, which is
The oil was flowing before.
I mean, they've been attacking ships in the Gulf. They've been taking, the Houthis have been taking pot shots. They sponsor the Houthis, the rebel group in Yemen, who have been taking pot shots at ships transiting the Red Sea, for example. So there are all kinds of implications for inaction as well. And look, sometimes where a regime is slaughtering its own citizens, trying to get nuclear weapons, sponsoring terrorism, then you have to take action. And in the short term, sometimes there are consequences, financial consequences, to that action. But let's hope this is over and done with as quickly as possible and the oil prices come down again.
Of course, it could go on for months. We're seeing firebombs in the skies of Tehran. Do you accept that as a result of the war that you're backing, we may see Iranian refugees on British shores? And would you back the government taking them?
Well, I think what I'd like to see is the conflict brought to a rapid conclusion without large refugee flows.
Of course.
And without further disruption.
But if they do come, do you think we should take some?
Well, I think the point of refugees is where people are fleeing persecution rather than fleeing a conflict in general.
You've literally just been telling us how brutal the regime is and how often they try and kill their own citizens.
That's why we need to get rid of. That's why they need to be removed.
But if that doesn't happen and this war keeps going and they flee and all they do, for example, what President Trump has told them to do, which is rise up, but then the regime survives, you wouldn't accept them even in those circumstances.
I've always thought we should have safe and legal routes for genuine, I stress the word genuine, refugees. And we've done that in the past. The UK has done that in the past.
So a Ukrainian-style scheme, perhaps?
Well, safe and legal and limited, if necessary. And we've done that in the past. I'll give you a couple of examples. You've given one example, which is the Ukrainian scheme. We did it for British nationals in Hong Kong as well. We also did it actually in the Syrian conflict.
So you would theoretically, depending on how long the war goes on, you would back some sort of Iranian refugee scheme?
If there was a prolonged conflict and if people were being genuinely persecuted,
Which they have been.
and if that was happening, then look, a limited safe and legal scheme is always something we've said we would look at. But you've got before you can do that, you've got to control illegal immigration across the channel, because we had last year Labour let in, I think, 41,000 illegal immigrants across the channel, and before you can, who are being accommodated now in hotels at a cost of about £4 billion a year, before you can set up safe and legal routes, you've got to fix the illegal immigration first. Otherwise, you simply don't have the capacity. So I think once the UK government fixes illegal immigration, which Labour, by the way, won't do because they're not taking the steps necessary, a Conservative government would, for example, by coming out of the ECHR and deporting illegal immigrants within a week of arrival. After you've stopped illegal immigration, then of course that gives you capacity to create limited safe and legal routes for people who are genuinely fleeing persecution, and you would, for example, prioritise women and children, as we did with Ukraine.
Chris Philp.
Honestly, I'm really glad that Lewis Goodall asked that question toward the end, because it highlights something that I genuinely don't understand about many people on the right. This is the part that just doesn't make sense to me. You have all these people supporting Donald Trump and saying that what he's doing is the right move, and that leaders like Keir Starmer should be backing him and supporting this war. But here's the part that I can't wrap my head around. If you go into another country and completely destabilize it, turn it upside down, and the people living there end up fleeing because their homes have been destroyed, where do they go? They're going to try to escape. Many of them will try to come to Western countries like Britain, the United States, or other parts of Europe seeking safety and refuge. And yet the very same people who are encouraging and supporting this war are often the exact same people who then complain when refugees arrive and try to settle in the West. That's the contradiction that I just cannot understand. How can you support actions that will inevitably create refugees, and then turn around and get angry when those refugees try to find safety somewhere else? It simply doesn't add up. That's why I thought Lewis Goodall made a really important point. He basically highlighted that the British public largely doesn't agree with this position. Many people here don't support getting involved in another conflict. And the reality is that, just like in the United States, people in the UK are focused on problems at home that need fixing first. We have our own economic challenges, cost of living issues, and social problems that need attention. So when politicians and commentators push so aggressively for war abroad, it leaves a lot of people wondering why those same voices aren't focusing on the issues right in front of us. And the frustrating part is that when things eventually go wrong, as they often do in situations like this, the very people who pushed for these decisions are usually nowhere to be found. That's why the whole argument feels so inconsistent. The logic just doesn't hold up. But at the same time, none of this should really surprise us anymore. A lot of these arguments are built on contradictions. There's often no clear long-term plan, just talking points and political positioning. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on this exchange down in the comment section below. I'm always interested to hear your perspective. And while you're down there, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and give the video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel with the YouTube algorithm. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in the next clip.